Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar today. We'll give everyone a few minutes to cycle in here. In the meantime, add a poll here for the audience. You can let us know what sector you're here from today, whether that's law enforcement, fire, different industry, or just using drones for personal use and looking to learn a little bit more. So see that quick poll up to take a look at, and we'll go ahead and get started here. Just a few minutes. Alrighty, go ahead and close the poll out here. And yeah, we've got about 27% from law enforcement, 9% fire, and then 60% from other industries. Looking to learn a bit more today. So yeah, thanks for taking some time to vote there. We'll do some polls throughout so you guys can see some different results. But without further ado here, we'll go ahead and get started on today's webinar, Improving Crash Scene Reconstruction with the Mavic 3 Enterprise and DJI Terra. A couple notes before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, so after the webinar is done, all registrants will receive an email with a recording of the webinar. There's also in the handouts tab a resources document where you can find links to lots of helpful information that we're going to cover today. And then also towards the end of the webinar, we'll have a quick survey that you can fill out if you'd like to get a 3-month trial license to DJI Terra. One other note before we jump into things here is that we understand that teams utilize different hardware, software, and processes. So at the end of the day, we do encourage networking with other agencies and personnel in your area to figure out what workflows and tools work best for you. Excited to be joined today by, first of all, Aaron Beckman, who is an active firefighter from Norfolk, Nebraska, where he's been working since 1999. He has a strong background in fire science and has been documenting scenes for over 20 years for the fire department. Works with multiple agencies in Nebraska and has aided in numerous cases. Since 2014, he has been mapping investigations utilizing various products. And specifically in 2019, he was able to assist several agencies during Midwest floods for search and rescue, recovery, and structural damage mapping. So really happy to have Aaron on today. We also have Brandon Carr from Pearland, Texas. He's a former chief pilot at the Pearland Police Department and UAS program coordinator there. Also worked as a night shift patrolman. He's recently joined the team at DroneSense as a solutions engineer for drone as a first responder. Brandon started his interest in aviation back in 2006, where he earned his commercial and CFI license for manned fixed wing, single engine, multi-engine, and instrument rating. And he was able to leverage that aviation knowledge to start the Pearland Police Department's UAS program. Since then, he's been able to assist over 250 agencies in starting or developing their programs across the nation. So really happy to have both Brandon and Aaron on today. These are both people I'm always bouncing off ideas and talking about accident reconstruction with, so happy they're able to take some time to join us today. My name is Grant Hostka. I lead our solutions engineering team over at DJI Enterprise, and then we also have Chief Wayne Baker on here as well, helping with some questions as well. So appreciate him hopping on. He's our Director of Public Safety Integration. And before we get started today, wanted to quickly remember Detective Eric Gunderson. He actually passed away in the line of duty in 2021 from COVID-19. He was an early adopter of drone technology and provided training across the state of Washington on the value of drones for crash reconstruction, and who actually was one of the first people I met who taught me a lot about the workflow for crash reconstruction. So we appreciate Eric and his work and remember him at the start of the webinar today. But jumping into things with our panelists first, and with another poll in the meantime from our panelists. Start me off, Brandon. Why do we use drones in crash scene reconstruction at a high level? What are the big points to remember?
The reason that we're utilizing drones for crash reconstruction is it's much faster and it's much safer. So by utilizing drones, we're able to collect a ton of data for that crash scene, get accurate measurements, and get that roadway clear, which allows citizens to go back to work, go home, allows officers and other first responders to be able to go back and service, which reduces the likelihood of a secondary crash.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed some key points right there. Aaron, and how about on your end? What brought you in to start doing crash scene reconstruction with drones?
You know, with me, I'm not law enforcement, I'm fire. So, when we get to a scene, we work the scene as first responders with the fire department. And then I step away and start documenting that scene. With the fire, what that drone does for us is, it provides us a map. So after the scene, we can sit there and debrief when we get back to the station on, how we came into that particular scene with our apparatuses. And we could sit there and prepare for the next scene of that particular incident and get ready for the next scene. So with fire, it's always prepare for the next call. So it doesn't matter if it's accident or fire. It just gives us another way of preparing for the next call. So.
Absolutely. So taking a look at our quick poll results here, looks like we have about 21% of attendees who've used drones for crash scene reconstruction, 52% who have not, but have used drones for creating 2D maps or 3D models, and then 27% who haven't done either. So hopefully some valuable information for everyone today, but interesting to have that data point kind of going in. So the solution we are talking about today is our DJI Enterprise solution, which really is comprised of three parts: collecting data, processing that data, and selecting a drone, selecting a tool for that mission. So we talk about things at a high level. We're going to get into how that data collection works from the controller side, what different data collection strategies look like, how to supplement the automated data capture, and then finally getting into creating 2D maps and 3D models. And here's one from Brandon's side where you can see that 2D map on the left side, and then our 3D model output here, which really does look like a photo, but is actually a 3D model from the Terra side. So we're going to break this down into different sections today, talking about what goes into selecting a drone, preparing the scene, actually collecting that data, processing the data, what we do after the fact utilizing that data. We'll run through some examples. There'll be a survey option to get a 3-month trial to Terra, and then we'll have some questions at the end. Some you submitted beforehand, and then we'll take some from Chief Baker as well after that as time permits. So first off, selecting a drone, and go to Aaron here to start. Why is the Mavic 3 Enterprise a good tool for the job, or a tool you would consider using for crash scene reconstruction?
It's a quick deploy aircraft. It's smaller aircraft. you know, before you'd have to have that bigger aircraft. It took up a lot of space in a patrol car or in a in a response vehicle. Where the Mavic 3 E or the thermal also, you know, it fits in a small Pelican case. The cool thing about the Mavic 3 is it's a mechanical shutter, so you know it provides a good image. And like I said, it's quick deploy. The other thing I like about that Mavic 3 Enterprise right now series is it runs that app 2 series in the controller, and so this seems like it's a little bit smoother to run based off of, you know, before we had that advance that runs just the app, you know, the DJI app 1. This DJI 2 in the controller just seems like it runs a little smoother, and it's faster processing when you get to the mapping process of that. So it's a good all around drone. So, and longer flight time, longer flight time also. Got to add that longer flight time. So
Yeah, definitely able to stay up longer to get a scene done in one battery instead of coming down for a swap.
I want to
Something that
I
we did
want to touch
have a, sorry, go ahead.
I want to touch base. The mapping aspect of the thermal is quite remarkable too. I was really shocked with the thermal, with the map of the M3T is definitely way better than what the advance was. I was really shocked what the map capability of the M3T was. So yeah.
Cool. And something we did have from attendees coming in too, and Brandon, I think this is something you could touch on with your experience, was where would you consider using something like the bigger aircraft and the bigger sensor, like the P1? Is that a tool you want to have in your toolbox as well? Or how does that stack up against the Mavic 3E for your crashing reconstruction deployment?
So we actually use a little bit of both. So we have the M300 with the P1, we have the M3E. Where we use the P1 is going to be very large scenes that I don't want to spend running either multiple batteries with, or I want to be able to fly higher and not lose that kind of data by utilizing the P1, not losing that clarity. So typically, if it's a really long scene or a really large scene, we'll use the P1. We also will be utilizing the P1 for disaster responses. So if we're using needing to do a mapping mission to do a damage assessment, like for example, there was a tornado that just came through the Houston area not too long ago, we can map that area with the P1 system, fly higher, not lose clarity, not lose data, and take less photos. So it's really beneficial for that. We typically will use the Mavic 3 Enterprise if we need to fly lower altitudes due to tree lines or power lines or things of that nature, where we don't want to run the risk of running a larger platform. So it just kind of depends on the incident and the operation. Sometimes we use both. It just depends on the scene. So yeah, it's a great camera.
Yeah, it's a good point there. And Aaron already touched on this one a bit. But when we get into our DJI systems that have a thermal camera, such as the Mavic 3T or the M30T, we do have a smaller wide camera that we'd use for mapping. So we do lose a bit of our sensor size, and then we don't have a mechanical shutter either. But Aaron, it's pretty much what you just said. You're still able to use that visual camera for mapping, even though maybe you give up a bit of resolution or speed.
Yeah, you give it up just a little bit, but like I said, I was shocked on the clarity of the map when we ran it through Terra for the first time. We've done some maps with the Advance, and you know, it works, especially when we're out fighting a grassland fire, you know, where we wanted to see how much acres were burned, and it's doable. But you know, if you had to fly an accident scene with it, it's maybe a little questionable. But with the M3T, it's doable. If that's the only aircraft that you got within your agency, it is doable. I was really shocked on the clarity of the model, of the 3D model, and of the ortho, looking straight down of that particular map. So.
Yeah, good points there. And just giving a quick table here for people to understand as well. With any of these really 3 aircraft or sensor combinations, you do have mission planning built in to the Pilot 2 app on the controller, and SDK options. Smart Oblique option is only available with the first 2 here. The Mavic 3E or the M300 and the P1 are able to capture photos at a faster rate of speed, allowing you to fly faster. And then your photo clarity with a mechanical shutter as the drone's moving and mapping. You're going to have a bit better detail there, larger sensor sizes, ability to sync the RTK data to your imagery, and then higher camera resolution. Obviously, the One Pro, something like the M30T, is the IP55 rating. So if there were operations at night, I'm sorry, not at night, but in adverse weather, you would be able to put the M30T up in that. So something to consider overall, but generally speaking here, our best solutions for survey and mapping for accident reconstruction are the Mavic 3E, the 300 plus the P1, while your general situational awareness still can be used, the sensors with the thermal there. And here's a quick sensor size comparison when you look at the P1, the Mavic 3E, and the Mavic 3T here on the bottom right. So that just gives you an idea of the sensor size here. And Brandon, where does sensor size come into play for these operations? Do you see any difference when operating in day versus night?
Yeah, so sensor size comes into play when it comes to ground sampling distance, right? It's all a mathematical formula on what your clarity or your final resolution for your final product is going to look like based off of your ground sampling distance. And sensor size does go into that algorithm. For night operations, it's also important to have a good sensor size that has a high dynamic range so that it can pull in a good amount of light and be able to not have too much noise or not have too much lose that clarity based off of the sensor that you're utilizing here. So running something with a bigger sensor like that will give you better products, generally speaking.
Yeah, and I think we can see that firsthand here with a quick comparison. This was out at the Law Enforcement Drone Association conference, kind of comparing the Mavic 3E and the Mavic 3T. So you can see at the higher level here, when we're talking about general situational awareness, they're going to be very similar. But as we begin to zoom in and having the rolling shutter with the Mavic 3T, the Mavic 3E helps improve the clarity there. You can see part of that truck is almost missing there, or that trailer, comparing the two. And then when we get really close, looking at ground sampling distance here, flight being at 125 feet, that's the Mavic 3T versus the Mavic 3E. So you can see you definitely have that better ground sampling distance that Brandon was referring to when you increase our sensor size and capabilities. So once again, just some data points there for you to see and consider. Next one we want to jump in here is we have our drone and getting out to the scene. What do we want to prepare? What do we want to consider? And I'll pass this over to you, Brandon, to kind of talk us through a few items, including accuracy and RTK. What are you thinking about, or what should agencies think about in this realm?
So whenever your agency is looking at accuracy, it's very important to talk to your district attorneys and find out what type of practices they want to align with. If your agency and your district attorneys, county attorneys are not all too worried about absolute accuracy, then you can use things like your total station or known measurements in your scene and still maintain a high level of relative accuracy. If your district attorney, like my district attorneys they wanted to align with best practices for surveyors and other remote sensors. And so we needed absolute accuracy, meaning we had to keep an RTK system on hand. We had to do ground control points and checkpoints to maintain that best practice. And so The big difference is relative accuracy is all the measurements that you will capture or all the measurements that you do in your project in Terra or whatever processing system you'll use. The measurements are accurate relative to your scene. So in this example, you can see we did measurements of the width of the roadway and the marked lane. And on the right-hand side, you can see those measurements are accurate, relatively speaking. On this scene, we also did an RTK rover, and we captured those points as well. So we had absolute accuracy associated with this scene as well. Absolute accuracy is the accuracy for your scene based off of real world measurements. So if you needed to be able to take your project and put it back on the physical earth, you can do that based off of the latitude and longitude information with your project.
You mentioned RTK there, so I know you mentioned initially, maybe we'll jump into GCPs and checkpoints here first, but on your scene, putting down ground control points and checkpoints with an RTK station?
Yeah, so we would put ground control points out across our scene, and you want to try to evenly distribute those out. Easiest way that I explained it to my guys was imagine your project is a tabletop. Your ground control points are the legs that stand your table up. So you don't want to have too many of them on one side. You don't want to have them all condensed in one location. You want to have them evenly distributed to help stand the table. And so one of the things we do is we put those targets out there, and then we would take our RTK rover, and then we would capture those known ground control points for each one of those targets. And the example we have here is we have that white on black ground control point target there. And so what we would do is we go get the rover and we put it right on top of there and capture that known point.
Definitely. Makes sense. And just a quick clarification for those who may not be aware when we're talking about ground control points, that's something we're going to use during the processing of the model. And then checkpoints, we'd collect them in the same manner, where we can use it afterwards, to verify our accuracy. And outside of that RTK rover on the ground, Brandon, what do we want to consider when it comes to using an RTK module on the drone itself, and what's the point?
So one of the benefits of using the RTK accessory on top of the Mavic 3 Enterprise is it allows you to connect to RTK correction. So as the drone is flying, it is able to get the corrected GPS data based off of your in-trip connectivity, and it will write that data to those images. And so whenever you pull those into DJI Terra, whatever processing system you're utilizing, those images will have the corrected RTK information, which allows you to have more accurate image locations, which helps with the overall accuracy of your project. Generally speaking, only using the RTK accessory on top of the Mavic 3 Enterprise, I'm looking at around a 3 centimeter RMSE, or my root mean square error, for my georeferencing of the drone images. If I incorporate in an RTK rover into that, I'm typically seeing around 1 centimeter accuracies. Some of the considerations to take into that is if you don't have a clear line of sight to the sky, then you're not going to have good RTK connectivity. If you're in a non-cellular environment, then you're not going to have good RTK connectivity, and so you will only have relative accuracy in there. As with all things, nothing is a silver bullet, so you have to take into your environment into account whenever you're looking at what type of accuracy you want to have when starting to collect this data.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thanks for good summary there. In the meantime, checked in with the audience. It looks like about half of folks are utilizing RTK, while almost 3/4 looking at known measurements. So interesting to see there. With the Mavic 3E, we do offer 2 options for connecting to RTK within the Pilot 2 app. Like Brandon mentioned, you can use a local N-Trip network to connect to, or you could also connect to the DJI DRTK2 base station, but you will need to place that over a known point on your scene. We are looking for absolute accuracy there. Really, say one other thing on the scene consideration side, perhaps you can talk to this, Aaron. would be regarding what do we need to think about outside of our drone? What comes into play when you're setting up a scene with these years of experience on your end?
Well, there's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff that you got to take into consideration is what that drone is going to crash into when you hit the start button. A lot of people don't take that into consideration, especially if you're flying a scene at night. You get there, you get the you're nervous, you want to hurry up and get this thing going. You got people wanting to know how long that's going to take because they want to get the roadways opened up. So you're not checking everything. So the first thing you got to definitely make sure is your minimal clearance, altitude clearance, tree lines, electrical lines, cell phone towers. You got to make sure that you're going to have clearance when you hit that play button or the start button when that thing takes off. And during the day, when we train this, mapping with students when we're teaching this, or student pilots, is during the day it seems like they're okay to fly because they can obviously see. At night when you have your VOs watching that thing, you're sending a drone up into the darkness, and that tense level is definitely very high. So you definitely got to make sure what's going on. The other thing to take into consideration is, we had an accident yesterday that we have a life flight that's coming in and landing on a scene, and they were roughly about a mile away from that scene. So when you want to start flying that accident, but you still have a life flight on scene, you got to take that into consideration too. You got to wait till all airspace is cleared. And then, down where Brandon is, I don't have that problem up here in Nebraska because we don't have, news media helicopters flying around. I'm not sure Brandon does down there, but out in California where you have a lot of news media helicopters flying around, is you got to take that into consideration too when you're doing, accident scenes and scenes like that. Is definitely got to make sure that you have the clearance to fly those accident scenes and get the proper authorization to fly those scenes. So
Yeah, very important on the deconflicting airspace side to have a safe flight. Anything to add on your side, Brandon, when kind of arriving on scene and setting up?
Yeah, so one of the things that we take into consideration is what our scene looks like. Generally speaking, crash scenes are nice and complex, which gives all the processing software things to look at and things to say, okay, that's the same object and all these same images. But if you're doing, say, disaster response or wildfire burn, things of that nature, flying low, having a low ground sampling distance, is not what you're looking for. You want to have your need to fly higher so that you can give the processing software more things to look at and more things to identify. If you have a fairly homogeneous scene, the processing softwares have a difficult time discerning what one thing is to the next. And so that's one of the considerations. Like, we don't have snow, but snow is a prime example of that. Snow is really hard to map because it doesn't know if that snowflake is the exact same snowflake in the next image, within the next image, and the next image. And so you may need to fly higher to give those images more objects in each image. Another thing to take into account is reflectivity of the surface. So if it is a wet surface for whatever reason, that also can provide difficulties and challenges to the processing software. So again, you may have to fly a little bit higher there to help the processing softwares figure out what's what.
Definitely. Good consideration there as well. So moving into the data collection side here, and I will say in our handouts, we have a lot more detailed information on some of the scene preparation topics that we covered shortly. So certainly feel free to jump into those more as well if you're looking to learn more about accuracy and RTK and those type of topics, if those are new on your side. But getting into data collection, we have a few different options. Can utilize the Pilot 2 app, which is built on your controller and offers a free option to fly our scene. And then we also have the mobile SDK, which offers the ability to customize missions and a little more interoperability across your command staff and team members. But covering the Pilot 2 side today, Aaron, what are we thinking about first daytime? We'll get into nighttime later during the webinar, but camera settings wise, what are we thinking about during the daytime?
You know, when I'm flying a scene during the day, I usually will, being a camera guy, you know, a longtime camera guy, the very first thing I always tell people is when you put the SD card in, always format the SD card. Always format that SD card. That's usually the first thing that I'll do is when you turn the drone on, when you're getting ready to fly a scene, it doesn't matter if you're mapping or you're just using that drone to document that scene, always format that card. It just should be a rule that you should always do is always format that card. So when I'm getting ready to map, I'll put it on a JPEG. If I had my way, I would shoot RAW, and then I would convert that RAW to a JPEG form in post processing. But just for now, I would put it over to JPEG, put it on mechanical shutter, and then I would leave it as an auto setting and let that camera, you know, basically just pick the auto setting during the daytime. You know, Brandon mentioned one time that you know if it's a cloudy day, you know, maybe adjust the settings a little bit. I agree with that. If you have any doubt, if it's a cloudy day, or if you have a nasty shadow for some odd reason, you know, if you're next to a tree line, you know, on a rural road, and you're next to a tree line, or you're in between a couple tree line on both sides of the road, and it's a little dark there. If in doubt, take that drone, hover over the middle of your scene, take a photo of it, and look at your photo why that drone's hovering over it. And if something doesn't look right, if it looks dark, or if it looks, you know, blown out, adjust your camera setting a little bit and put it in a manual, you know, in the manual setting, and then you know, plan your mission setting and put it on a manual setting, and let your map go. So if in doubt, if you think that there's shadows or you know, or your exposure is blown out, just take a quick photo of the middle of your scene and just double check. But during the day, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, I always use auto setting. So.
Yeah, no. Fun fact about Aaron, he's actually quite the photographer. If you're a fan of Nebraska, some of the photos you've probably seen there come from Aaron himself. So really a wealth of photography knowledge. Aaron, if we do go into those manual settings, is there anything we want to avoid, or any setting we want to like leave as is? What are maybe some guidelines if we're going into manual?
So if you're ever going into manual setting, the only thing I could tell you, which is absolutely a rule of thumb, is your minimum shutter speed to eliminate motion blur is 1/60th of a second. 1/60th of a second. You can never go below 1/60th of a second. Doesn't matter if it's nighttime or daytime. Now, during the daytime, if you go 1/60th of a second and it's the middle of the afternoon, your ISO should be 100. And at 1/60th of a second at ISO 100, it looks like you're shooting white paper, because you're going to be, it's not going to happen. So most of the time you're going to be like 1/200th of a second, or a 250th of a second at ISO 200 during the daytime. So, but rule of thumb, the most important setting that you always will have to remember, doesn't matter if it's at night or at day, the minimum shutter speed that you'll always have to remember is 1/60th of a second. It's the slowest shutter speed that you could possibly go. So.
Yeah, great tip. Appreciate that. And just quick screenshots here from the Pilot 2 app. Can take a look here, just making sure in the settings menu, your image ratio, your image format, click the 3 dots, make sure your mechanical shutter is on and dewarping is off. Format the SD card like Aaron talked about, and then kind of on the Pilot 2 homepage, making sure all modules are up to date. And dewarping might be a setting some of you aren't familiar with, Brandon. So could you tell us, looking at this photo, is dewarping enabled here, or what are we looking at here?
Right. So just as you had just mentioned, you want to make sure that you have dewarping turned off. You want to, essentially the way that it works in Grant, you may be able to clarify this because I probably am going to explain it badly, but it's essentially cropping it. And you want to make sure that you're not cropping that sensor out. So you want to make sure you have dewarping turned off, and so that you're going to see those, what I call vignetting in the top corners. However, it doesn't affect the processing at all. You will not see it in any of your final products utilizing any of the softwares that I've tested with the Mavic 3 Enterprise series.
Yep, I think that's short and sweet. Nailed it. So now getting into data capture. This is a scene we're out with Brandon capturing an example, and you can see that we have our automated data capture up top here when we've pulled the photos into Terra, and then we have two what we call manual data capture circles. So getting into this process a bit, Brandon, for your daytime photo collection strategy, one of the best ways to collect overlapping photos is using some of the mission planning tools that are available in Pilot 2 or different SDK software. So if you first open up the Pilot app, you go into flight route, create a route, you have a variety of options here, including mapping, oblique, or linear. And just for the sake of time today, going to refer you to our DJI Enterprise YouTube page, which has training courses on all of these different modes, on how you'd set it up, and really how things work. But I wanted to get in today with our panelists is some of the key settings in here when we're planning an automated mapping mission, that lawnmower pattern where we're capturing overlapping photos. So Brandon, from your side, you talked about what we're capturing affecting altitude, but generally speaking, what else comes into your decision when determining altitude, overlap, and some of the different options there, such as oblique or smart oblique?
So what we end up doing is the first thing we're going to look at is what does our operational environment look like? If we're going to have high trees, power lines, and things of that nature, we want to fly at the lowest altitude we can safely clear all obstacles. And so that's going to be one. And so if I'm going to set up my autonomous mission, I want to make sure that I can clear all of that. In Houston, in my area, generally speaking, that's around 120 feet. So most of our autonomous mapping missions occur at around 120 feet. So that's the first thing we'll do. The second thing that we pay attention to is what does our final product need to be? Is this a single vehicle accident where there's not going to be any type of criminal charges placed forward? Do I need a 3D model? If it's something that I don't need that, I just need a 2D diagram, I'm not going to spend the time to turn on Smart Oblique, even though it's incredibly fast. I'm not going to spend the time to do the orbits and things of that nature. If this is something that I do need to have a good 3D model with, that's when I will start setting up Smart Obliques, or I'll do a 3D grid pattern. Or I will do what we had in the previous slide, where we had the ladder with the orbits. Something to pay attention to is in this example, I had a nice clear area. This is our training field. And so I can do that, but very, very often I don't have the ability to set up an autonomous orbit or things of that nature. So I have to fly it manually. I may need to skirt in between power lines. I may need to do a half orbit around a wood line or things of that nature. So generally speaking, the ladder and the orbits, I typically am doing that manually, just because my operational environment doesn't allow for an autonomous mission. So one thing that I do want to stress is you can't make data from nothing. So whenever you are setting up your overlaps, you want to have a minimum of 80%, 80-70 on the front and side overlap. I typically tell my guys to do 90-90 because, again, I can't make data from nothing. I would rather have too many images than not enough images. And so we do 90-90. It's a lot of images. It takes more battery life, but it's not that big of an issue. But you want to have a minimum of 80-70 as far as the overlap goes. Smart Oblique is also an outstanding option for the Mavic 3E and the P1 system, because it allows you to do that 3D grid, and it will automatically take the images for you, so it doesn't take the time of a 3D grid flight. I love Smart Oblique with the P1. The first time I had it running, it kind of freaked me out because it looked like the camera was going nuts, and I wasn't quite ready for that. But it's an outstanding feature that saves a lot of time on the roadway.
Very nice, very nice. And just a quick screenshot here. Go to photo timed and turn a timer on as a tool. If you're flying around the scene manually and you want to make sure you get overlapping photos, you can put that down to 0.7 seconds, I believe, on the Mavic 3E. So that was what Brandon utilized here to manually fly these 2 circles. One good point of news as well is that we're planning to release the automated orbit feature for the Mavic 3E, hopefully here in the next month or so. So even if you're not as good as Brandon flying these nice, beautiful circles, you'll be able to automate that too. But obviously just making sure to consider what's around your scene as well. So Brandon, just to confirm here, you did a 2D map over top, and then you did kind of a ladder here with a couple manually flown orbits, and that you'd say, if the scene allows it and you're trying to generate a 3D model, that'd be your typical data capture strategy.
Correct, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll fly the 2D grid, as you see here. The automatic setting for the Enterprise, if you don't have Smart Oblique turned on, is a 90 degree straight down or nadir camera orientation. And then what I'll do is I will fly those 2 orbits. I don't descend on the first orbit anything less than 50% of my altitude for my grid. So for example, for easy math's sake, if I flew my grid at 100 feet, then the lowest altitude I'll fly my first orbit is 50 feet. Typically I'm around 60 for that. And then again, a half distance for the next orbit. So I wouldn't fly anything less than 25 feet for that. And then I do what I call the ladder, which I'll start at the altitude of my grid, and then I'll take photos roughly every 5 to 10 feet, all the way down to the lowest altitude I want to fly over my focal point. And all that does, it's just a trick I've learned over the years of doing this, that it helps the processing system understand what's going on, where those images of the orbit need to be in relation to the 3D grid. So it just helps with the processing. It's not an exact science or anything like that. It's just lessons learned. And so if I have multiple areas of the crash, like we had one fatal where we had our focal point here, and then there was a car who kind of ping-ponged through it all and landed over here. So I'd have 2 ladders and orbits over those 2 focal points. So.
Makes sense, makes sense. Yeah, I've seen some good success trying that out myself as well. So speaking of processing data, let's get into that next. And our DJI enterprise solution for that is called DJI Terra. And here's actually a 3D model from Brandon's side, and you can see some of the capabilities of Terra here in an area where it really shines in putting together these 3D models. Brandon, I don't know if you want to touch on anything about this scene or not.
Yeah, so this scene was obviously captured at night. We used Fox Fury Nomad 360s to illuminate the scene. We also used our marked units to throw light with their high beams. We used the takedowns on the trucks, and then we also used our firefighters to use their scene lightings, because their fire trucks have outstanding lighting systems built into those as well. And so the way that we did this scene, this was actually shot with a Mavic 2 Pro. I did this entire scene in video, actually. And so the way that I set that up is I flew it the exact same way I would do a photogrammetry scene. I turned video on, I flew my 3D grid, and then I flew my ladder and my orbits. And then I went in and we pulled X amount of frames out. And I pulled the most amount of frames out that my computer could handle, just to make sure that I had the proper amount of overlap. And then I dumped these images into my processing system. I geo-referenced them again, utilizing our RTK rover. And that's how I brought this, that's how I created this scene. This scene was done in Terra, did an outstanding job. Memory serves, everything in this scene was accurate to 1.2 centimeters. Total time on scene for me was 20 minutes, and that includes the flight and capturing the RTK ground control points. Granted, they were on scene for a little bit longer because they had to get the tow trucks out there. They had to do the rest of their investigation. But as far as a data collection standpoint, what used to take hours on hours on hours on hours, I was done in 20 minutes, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we'll jump into the nighttime a bit more with Aaron here shortly. For those of you who aren't familiar with Terra, just some quick highlights for you. As you can see, the Terra engine, it's running its own engine that's been built over the years, which helps with creating some of these very robust 3D models. On the processing speed side, Terra is also built to process imagery quickly. So about in a minute, you could process 12 Mavic 3 Enterprise images for a 3D reconstruction and 36 images for a 2D reconstruction. So you'll notice the speed of Terra is a plus. Also, the data is stored and processed on your local computer. So there's no cloud processing or uploading on the Terra side. The interface is very simple for use when running a model through. And then there's also powerful tools that are built in on the Terra side alongside that simple interface. So something to consider with any photogrammetry software that you're running is you do need a high-powered, and from what I've seen, it's always Windows. I don't know of any that run on the Mac side, and feel free to chip in the comments if you have any comments there. But generally speaking, for any type of offline photogrammetry software, you're going to need a high-powered Windows computer. So you can kind of see the minimum specifications for a computer here that we recommend for Terra, including the RAM, graphics card, and CPU. But just quickly showing some of the tools here in Terra. When you import photos, you can quickly select an area of interest or photos that you want to process. So that comes into play if you, once Brandon said, oftentimes you collect more data than you need on scene. If that's outside of the area and not relevant, you can easily delete that data. You can also edit your image metadata. So Brandon, I think this came up with you when utilizing the RTK service because your NTRP service was a different coordinate system than the drone. So we're able to edit the image metadata when importing. After you've completed the arrow triangulation step in Terra, you can select a region of interest. So if there's point cloud data that's not relevant for your 2D map or 3D model, you can go ahead and select an area that you do care about or import that area. Brandon mentioned ground control points and checkpoints, so you can add those both in Terra for helping with the processing of your model and checking the accuracy after the fact. And then with the point tool, you can select any point within Terra, and then you're able to pull up individual images to zoom in if you'd like to look at an image that contains that point that you selected. After processing on the Terra side, you also get what we call a processing report. It gives you information about the camera, information about your ground control points, checkpoints, images, and all that good information as well. You've seen it in use a few times, but on the Terra side, you can also measure distance, area, volume, and specific coordinates as well. So hopefully that gives you an idea of Terra and some of the tools that are in it. Within our handout section, we have a link to a video and a PDF that goes over the process for creating a 2D map or 3D model, and then some of the additional tools and how to use those. But after we've run our model through Terra and you have a 3D model output, you do also have the option to export that model to a variety of formats. If you'd like to do a point cloud, a 3D model, a TIFF, 2D map, those are all options. And you can also select a coordinate system there for your output. But I think a question a lot of people do have for Brandon and Aaron here is, what happens after Terra? What happens after we run our model through? So be curious to hear from you both here. Can start with Brandon, but what does that process look like on your side after the processing is complete?
So after the processing is complete, one of the first things that we're going to do is create our 2D diagrams. This is an example of one. So the diagram here is built in Esri, but you can build out any type of 3D diagram based off of any kind of solutions that y'all may be using. I know a lot of agencies use Leica's Map 360. A lot of agencies use Ferrozone 3D. Whatever diagramming software you use. For us, Pearland likes to use Esri because they make really nice diagrams here. And so what we'll do here is we'll take our 2D orthomosaic or 2D stitched image that's georeferenced, and we will place this into this, what we call layout. From here, I will put important markers in here, important measurements that we may have used for each one of these. So the red dots here are what we use for our ground control points. So those were known RTK rover data collection points that I did. I captured more than I typically need. This was the very first scene that we tried to use an RTK rover on. And so I captured a ton of them just to see what it would do. So we captured a bunch of those, and then we also would go through and make sure that we have our scale orientation or our project orientation and our scaled measurement at the very bottom there for diagramming purposes. Again, this is just for a 2D map. I typically will do a scene overview diagram. I'll do a focal point diagram. I'll do a measurements diagram, and anything else that the Crash Reconstructions thinks is pertinent. So one important part about the way that Pearland organized our team was our drone team supported Crash Reconstruction. So if they needed anything, we would provide it for them. So from a 2D diagram perspective, this is what a final product would look like. We also do 3D animations. So what we would then do is we would take the point cloud that is generated either from DJI Terra, and we could put that into a program like Virtual Crash, or we can integrate that into Map 360 or Ferrozone, what have you, and do our physics engines to test the math and to see what actually would happen with those systems. And then we also can host the 3D models in Esri as well, so that anybody can capture whatever measurements they want with the same model. It won't matter what measurement anybody takes, so everybody's working with the same equipment. And then we take all of that data and we put it into evidence for chain of custody.
Yeah, makes sense there. And Aaron, on your side, I know you touched on it a bit earlier, but you talked about on the fire side, to kind of add to Brandon's front, that you're able to review data after an incident with the team as a bit of a debrief.
Yeah, so with the help of Brandon, he shared his knowledge about Esri, so we started using Esri so we can upload these maps to Esri, where we could share the links to the shift captains. They can do their debriefing on that, and then when I get called out to assist with accident reconstruction in different counties, I usually just go there to assist, find the maps. I usually ask them, what they need, if they're going to put it in Faro zone, and if they do, I know that I have to export that stuff into an LAZ file, and then I usually, when I get done with that, just give them all the documentation that I do, and chain of custody goes over to them, and then I'm sort of out of it then. So all I am is just a guy that comes in and maps that and gives them the information, and I'm done. So drones are starting to become a big thing now in Nebraska because of Chief Wayne Baker's presence up here in Nebraska, and so it's starting to become more people are starting to get drones here in Nebraska, and accident reconstruction is starting to become a big thing now in Nebraska. So I'm not having to fly as much as what I used to, so it's a good deal.
Very nice, very nice. And here's an example here too of just merging a couple of point clouds And this is in Cloud Compare free software. So this is actually laser scanner data inside and drone data on top. So it's kind of split here, but you can see adding the drone data. And also, Eric, who we mentioned at the beginning, one of the big incidents he worked on was a train derailment and was able to merge laser scanners on the ground with the drone as well. So good opportunity to kind of work together on the two here. And before we jump into Aaron showing some examples from his end, and while we get that set up, Brandon, a key question from folks has been about data and bringing that data into the trial or into the legal system. So be curious to hear your experience there from your work and how that went.
Yeah, so in my area, we went from a district attorney who was very adverse to technology to a new district attorney who was very pro technology. And so one of the biggest things that we had to navigate was how to show that the traditional methods that we had been using aligned with the way that we're doing it now, utilizing photogrammetry. And so we had to show, we had to go in and do the same types of operations using traditional methods and do photogrammetry at the same time, and then compare apples to apples and present that to our district attorney so that he could ask questions and he could try to poke holes in it so that we can build up his confidence in that we knew what we were talking about and the processes that we were utilizing are accurate. Not only are they accurate, but they also align with traditional surveying practices that have been tried in court over many, many, many years. That was a big key point in that. There has been a few cases that I've had in pretrial where we have discussed the accuracies of from both a defense attorney perspective, which is always entertaining, and a prosecution attorney standpoint. And we would have those discussions and talk about how I know those measurements are accurate and how I know that it's accurate across the entire footprint. And that's where it's highly important to utilize absolute accuracy, because it allows you to ensure that you have an accurate project or some type of scale constraints so that you know that you have an accurate project across the entire project that you're capturing those measurements on. So being able to prove that in court goes a really, really long way, not only in the confidence of your work, but also with the confidence of your prosecutor. So if you're ending up having to defend this in court, they understand that you do know what you're talking about and that you do know that your information is accurate.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing that information. I know we had a lot of people curious about that. Looks like we got Aaron all set up now to kind of run through some examples in Terra and specifically talk about data collection at night. So lighting, camera settings, Terra, take it away, Aaron.
So the key question is, how many lights do we need to map at night? And my answer to that is as much light as you could possibly get. I remember I was just talking to Barry Moore this morning, and we were talking about the very first map that I ever flew at night, and it was horrible. It was the worst thing that I ever could see, and so. I'm going to say probably minimum of 3 Fox Fury Nomad 360 lights. And there's a couple things that I wanted to show here. Is obviously, like I was saying before, when you're flying at night, you obviously want to hover over that scene, and you definitely want to set your camera manually. First thing you want to do is, the rule of thumb is never shoot below 1/60th of a second. If you shoot below 1/60th of a second, your images are going to be blurry. Believe it or not, with this lighting setup, I was shooting at 1/100th of a second, and my ISO was 800th. ISO 800. Now, what's cool about the M3E is when you zoom in here, there's hardly no grain at all. Now, would it be better with the P1? Yeah, it would definitely be better with the P1, but it's still good. Now, when you go to the 3D, it's quite amazing, actually. So I always say you always want to shoot with a halo of light, and 3 is minimum. Because if you would do 2, you would have some horrible shadows. And there's obviously some different lighting techniques that we can do too, to get rid of some shadows underneath the truck and stuff like that. Brandon was talking about shooting in snow. Actually, I love shooting in snow because it gives you more light to play around with. Think about it as a big reflector. Everyone goes and gets their photos taken. The photographer walks out. You got these big reflectors, that they're pointing at you. It's giving you actually more light to play around with when you're shooting in snow. So 3 lights is minimum. 2 in the front or the impact zone, 1 on the back side of it. One thing I want to show you is what does it look with 4 lights then on that particular scene. 4 lights is obviously a little bit better. Definitely really gets rid of those shadows then with 4 lights. And the other thing about the Fox Fury lighting is these are high CRI lights. So it definitely with the high CRI lighting with the Fox Fury, and I don't want to sit here and become a commercial for Fox Fury, but it shows true color with Fox Fury. It's one of the only lights on the market. I'm not going to say it's the only light on the market, but it's the most important part about lighting up a scene at night is to make sure that those lighting goes up 8 foot or higher. You want that lighting to shoot down on your subject or on your scene and not straight at. A lot of the lighting that you'll get at your hardware stores will only go 6 foot and it's shooting at. And the only way I could describe that to you is we've all gone in and made our wives or our significant others happy to get our picture taken, in a photography studio. And when you go to a photography studio and that photographer sets up those studio lights to take your picture, those lights aren't directly shooting at you. It's shooting down on you, because if it shoots at you, you could tell just by my glasses when you're looking at me that you're going to get a reflective light, back at you. And you don't want that. If that light is shooting directly at your scene, you're going to get a lot of reflective. You're going to get a lot of nasty shadows in there. So if you're going to go out and get lighting, to shoot scenes at night, you obviously want those lighting, any kind of lighting that you're looking at getting to be at least 8 foot or taller, so you could shoot that down. Now, one of the cool things about Terra, and we got to playing around with this here a couple weeks ago, is this particular map. Now, Brandon, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to have you guess how many lights I used to do this model.
At one time, or did you shift it like I do? 3,
I shifted.
4, 5, 6 lights total.
I only used 4. So
really nice.
That's the cool thing about Terra is obviously we got the ground control points exactly like you said. Set the ground control points up like you're setting it up on a table. I didn't move the ground control points, but it stitched those 3 maps really, really good. Now, what Brandon was saying, can we get better? Can we get better detail in the van? You got to remember that up here in Nebraska, when we were flying this, it was -10 out that night that we were flying this. So we were hustling just a little bit. Brandon's way of flying this is doing the orbits around this. We did this oblique flying, where if we would have dropped down a little bit and did the individual orbits around the vehicles, we would have probably got better detail on those vans. But like I said, we were hustling to try to get out of there. By the time that we were out of there, we were pretty frozen. We did 3 maps of this, and I'll show you guys what the 3 maps look like. So there's the one map on the excursion. Sorry about that. I hit the wrong one. Map in the middle. So all we did was we just shifted those lights back and forth to always have those ground control points in. And then we just combined those 3 maps together, and it was really simple to get that last map. So the accuracy was pretty spot on too. And it was, and there's the first one with the van. So, yep. So a lot of people want to know, how many lights do I need to do a big scene? It depends, you know, budget wise, depends on time. You know, if you got the time to move your lights around, you can easily stitch your map together like what I just showed you in Terra. It's really, really simple. As long as you don't mess your ground control points up. Those ground control points help stitch those maps together, especially if you use an RTK to hit those ground control points with an RTK rover system. It just brings that map all together more accurate too between all those maps. One last map that I wanted to show off is a map that we had, and this is one that we like to show off, and this is one that for the fire department, it just gives us an example of how we can sit in here and debrief an accident. You know, it's a foggy morning. You know, obviously a truck pulled out in front of another truck. This is just something that, you know, departments, we had several departments on this. It was a mutual aid department, you know, mutual aid call. It just gives fire departments a way to sit here and debrief this on how apparatuses came in, where they were stationed. You know, if this call comes in again at this particular highway, you know, this main highway that feeds our community, you know, if another, you know, if an accident like this ever happens like this again, how do we pull into an accident like this? I mean, there's a lot of discussion with fire departments on this particular scene. You know, if you look, we have vehicles here, you know, on a head facing a different direction on that highway that's supposed to go the other direction. You know, so we do mapping like that on fire calls too. And there's one particular fire call that we had this past fall that we had a fire. I mapped it because the guys wanted to know, it was basically in the middle of a block, on what hydrant was closer. You know, was it the south hydrant or was it the north hydrant? And it was almost 150-foot difference. They hit the longest hydrant. And I kid you not, I want to say about a month later, we had a fire at that particular house again. And because of the, you know, the debriefing of the maps and stuff, they hit the closer hydrant this time. So it was this, you know, situational awareness, looking at those maps, debriefing, and just, you know, going over that kind of stuff just helps, I guess, preparation of the next call when it comes on the fire side of it. So
Phenomenal. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Aaron. That's cool to see those scenes and lighting tips as well. So mentioned it earlier, if you are interested in a 3-month trial license for DJI Terra, you can scan the QR code here with the phone to go ahead and do this 3-month trial survey. You'll be sent a 3-month trial code. This does, if you're watching this as a replay, will need to be done before February 3rd if you'd like to do this. While we leave this up for a second, wanted to jump into some of the questions that people submitted when registering for the webinar. And the first one, I know we've talked a lot about topics here, but for a department that's just getting started using drones for vehicle crash reconstruction, what considerations or thoughts might you add for them? And Brandon, we'll start with you and then hear from Aaron as well on this one, because I think it's an important question.
So for starting out equipment, you need a minimum of a drone that has a decent camera. So again, it's going to be very variable on what your budget looks like. The Mavic 3E is a great option. It's a low price point, but you can do photogrammetry with anything. You can do it with your cell phone if you needed to. So whatever drone that you can use to allow you to get an aerial perspective and take photos is a great entry point. Going back to talking with your district attorneys, you need to find out if they want you to align with best practices for surveyors. And if that's the case, then you're going to need some type of RTK system. We went through Forensic Mapping Solutions to discuss that. They have a bunch of really great alternatives. You may want to reach out to your GIS divisions with your cities or counties. They may already have RTK units and pay for the services. So you may not have to spend any money like we did, where our GIS division had a Trimble unit, and we were able to start leveraging that. And then, of course, your processing software. You're going to want to make sure that you have something that is going to be able to take the data and be able to geo-rectify and correctly create those models and processes like DJI Terra, which is just outstanding. And then you want to have a computer that can handle the workload. Just like Grant was talking about earlier, there are a lot of computers out there. You want to make sure that you have a lot of RAM so that it can handle a lot of images. Generally speaking, I'm looking at somewhere between 300 to 1,000 images for every scene, and every scene is a little bit different, which is why the variation is so big. But generally speaking, we're seeing around that. We use a company called Puget Systems that builds computers specifically for photogrammetry. Doesn't matter what the processing software is, which is really nice, and they have some pretty good deals. So you want to have a minimum of a computer that can do the processing, the data, the software to process that data, and a drone that has a good camera on it. That's what's going to be the minimum entry that you need. If you have to have an RTK, then you have to add that in, but make sure that you talk to your district attorneys and see exactly what they're looking for so that you can make those assessments.
Anything to add on this one, Aaron?
I would say that, the M3E is probably, with all the drones out there, the M3E is probably the best, not the best drone, but probably one of the better choices to get out there. It's very budget friendly right now to get into. I agree with everything that Brandon Carr is saying. The computer, I think, issue, or the computer side of it is the shocking point that a lot of law enforcement and fire departments agencies don't really understand is you got to have that computer to process that. The only thing that I'm going to say is go out and train with it. You got to go out and you got to go out and fly missions and understand what that drone is going to do when you do a smart oblique mission, or when you do just an oblique mission, or just a regular mapping mission. You got to understand what that drone is going to do, because the first time I did an oblique mission with the M3E, the thing started flying backwards, and I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. I wasn't quite prepared for that yet. But, when you start to understand what that thing is going to do, it doesn't really freak you out. And you want to do that during the day. So if you get called out at night, you fully understand what that thing's going to do when you hit the start button.
No. Great point. Great point. Continuing on with some questions here. Cost, obviously, a question from folks. For Terra side, you're looking at in US dollars, $1,540 per year, or you can buy a permanent license for $4,400, and that's $440 a year after the first year for additional updates. And then for the drone side, the Mavic 3 Enterprise, your base package is around $3,800 US dollars, but can be in the $4,000 to $5,000 range if you're adding additional batteries, chargers, etc. So let's say maybe around $5,000 and a fully kitted out Mavic 3E there. And I think we talked about some of the other costs of getting a program started as well. Computer for the processing side is definitely a must if you want to do your processing locally there. Here's an interesting one that we've gotten some folks. Can the Mavic Mini be used for crash reconstruction? Brandon, what are your thoughts here? Nope, Brandon.
There it is.
There it is.
So when the Mavic Mini 1 first came out, I was teaching a class in Georgia for Georgia State Police. And we ran over to Gresco and grabbed one, and I actually did a Mavic mapping mission. So again, any camera can be used. However, you have to take into all the camera specifications into account if you're going to be using a system like this. So that is a low megapixel camera. It is a low sensor size. It does not have a high dynamic range. And so you have to take that into account. All that means is you're going to have to fly lower and you're going to have to take more photos. So to answer the question directly, can it be used? Yes. Is it recommended? No. That's just something you have to work with. Now, if that's the only thing that your agency has, by all means, and use that platform, build out some successful projects to get a better platform the next year on the next budget year.
All right, I think that's good there. Aaron, one for you here. You talked about some of the camera settings, but some specific concerns here about white cars creating what is labeled as a burnt hole in the 3D model. Is that something you've encountered, or any tips here that you might share?
Yeah, that's a tough one. White cars during the day when you have that high sun, that is definitely a tough situation. Even a white car, when you have the lights at night. So what I recommend is there again, hovering that drone, taking a couple photos and trying to pick that middle. So if you think about it, us camera guys will do a bracket photo where you take 3 photos. You take a high exposed photo, a dark photo, and then a medium photo, and you combine the 3. Now, obviously, you can't do that with a drone. So what I'm saying is take a high exposed photo, take a low exposed photo, and take a normal photo and look at all 3 of them and try to figure out what photo at what exposure is going to give you the most detail of that white car. But then you got to look at your other detail that you're also going to need in that particular scene. So you're going to want to take a couple photos at different exposures and see what's the happy medium, and then go from there. But you're bringing up an excellent point of some of the situations that you're going to run into. Some of the situations that we're going to run into: white car in snow, or the other one that we'll run into, or some people will run into, black on black at night, or skid marks at night on an asphalt. Those are always tough situations that you got to try to photograph. So.
Thank you, sir. And question, I guess, comes from my side here. Any plans to make a Mavic with an IP rating? Unfortunately, you can't talk about anything on the future side, but obviously we have released the new Mavic series recently. Unfortunately, does not have an IP rating. When we do get into IP rating and something like the M30, those type of materials are a bit heavier, so it's definitely an engineering challenge there, but certainly something to consider in the future. In regards to weather conditions exceeding the aircraft profile, I wouldn't recommend flying from the manufacturer side there, but I guess that is something to ask too, Brandon. If you are having some rain in the forecast, is there a situation, or it is raining, where you'd still put up something like the M30T and try to capture some data, or are you finding that you're getting some water on the lens and it's not worth it at that point? What's your
Right.
I guess reaction there?
So just what you said, getting any type of moisture or water on the lens, it ruins your entire data set. prior to using photogrammetry for crash reconstruction, we have been doing it without having the actual vehicles in the models for years and years and years. So it's a non-issue for us to just handle it the old way. Tow those vehicles out, I let that weather pass through. I can come back in and map the roadway with all the paint markers on the ground, and then I can artificially add those vehicles back into my diagram and still be able to maintain a high level of accuracy.
Makes sense. Go back to Aaron here. When you're arriving at the accident, what total area would you consider covering or mapping? Say you're drawing out your automated mission. What area are you going to be considering there?
Well, that's a loaded question. If I'm just going to cover for the fire department, what I'll do is I'll ask the IC, or I'll ask our IC that's in control of that scene, and I'll be like, hey, do you want me to map this accident for our debriefing? And if they say yes, I'll ask them, roughly how much do you want this covered, and they'll tell me, or I'll use best judgment. Now, if I get called out to assist with accident reconstruction of that scene, I'm not in charge of that. I'm just there to assist. So I will ask them, hey, how much do you want this covered? And they will give me those details. But rule of thumb is obviously you want probably at least 100 foot on both directions of that debris field, or where they're entering the ditch or whatever. They, the investigating officers will usually have an area where they want that accident scene marked, where they want that covered. So Brandon, you might want to step in and maybe answer that too a little bit.
Exactly right, Aaron. The first thing that I do is I find out how big my scene is, and then I will make sure that I do a good amount of overlap outside of my scene parameters to make sure that my entire scene has good image overlaps. So that's the biggest things that I take into consideration. Again, going into safety, I make sure that first on scene, handle the scene, make sure everybody is safe. And then once it moves from a reactionary perspective into a response perspective, then I'll start worrying about building out a mapping scene and things of that nature. Making sure I'm not underneath any power lines whenever I launch the drone. That's highly important. Overhanging trees, things of that nature. Make sure that I have all the airspace authorizations that I need. The other thing to take into consideration is the dynamicness of the scene. So if you are going to be capturing your scene whenever you start flying the drone, the first thing that I'll yell out is, hey, I'm about to take a whole lot of photos. So if you want to be in the evidence, make sure that you don't move. If you want to be out of it, make sure that you get out of my scene. And typically you'll see people scurry off fairly quickly after that, which makes a nice static scene. You don't want to have a lot of movement going on whenever you're capturing all of those images. Otherwise, it can mess up the processing side of the house. So try to make sure you can have as static as a scene as possible.
Yep.
Makes sense. One more question here from the pre-submitted ones is, what aircraft is DJI compatible with? Does that include Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced? And you can process the 2D maps and 3D models in Terra with images from any DJI aircraft and a variety of other cameras as well. You just really need the metadata within the photo for that reconstruction process to happen. And we are running a bit short on time here with about 5 minutes left. I wish we had some time. Maybe we'll go a few minutes over. But Chief Baker, I know you've been in the background here and overwhelmed a bit with the question side, but is there a couple questions you've gotten, or maybe you've gotten a few people asking for the panelists that you'd want to share here?
Yes, first, let me apologize for misreading and misspeaking on the Brandon Carr question about the orbit. I still don't believe that he has that good of skills, but the orbit is not a feature right now, although I know Grant has been discussing that internally. Some of the good questions we've had, I know there have been several on thermal mapping, which I know is not something a lot of people have necessarily looked into. If anyone can address that one.
So I've done some thermal mapping, Chief. I can only think of 2 scenes that we've done some thermal mapping with our fire investigator, our fire marshal. One was a particular salvage scene, and what we were trying to pinpoint was pretty much the hottest zone of that particular fire. It showed us that, but it really didn't give us a whole lot of data. And then the other one was sort of a house burn that we were doing, trying to practice or trying to use that thermal mapping to see if I got on scene fast enough. While locating the fire, can I hurry up and do a thermal mapping of a particular house fire while they're fighting it? And the answer is I just don't have enough time to do that. So I've only done it twice, and one time was during a fire, and one time was after a fire to see if we could find the hottest area of a fire. And both were good maps, but you have to be able to fly in a fire on a fire scene very, very quick to really make it work, I guess is my honest opinion on it. So
I haven't had the opportunity to test this yet, but while I was at the last Law Enforcement Drone Association conference, there was a crash investigator that was talking about how he also shoots his crash investigations in thermal. And the reason is he's able to see yaw marks or skid marks easier on thermal than he is on RGB, especially for light skids or light yaw marks, because as they put that rubber down on the road, it has a different emissivity as the asphalt or the concrete. And so they actually pop a little bit better. And I thought that was super interesting because I never thought about doing that. And so that's certainly something that I'm very interested in trying. I just haven't had the opportunity to do so, but something that y'all may be able to give a shot and let us know.
it would be interesting. I think you'd have to fly it really low, Brandon, honestly, to get that. I mean, you'd have to fly that thing really, really low, and you'd have to fine tune that quite a bit, I would think. So
right, well, going back into sensor size, right? Sensor 640 by 512. So you will have to fly that lower. But he said that he had great results from it. And so I thought that was super interesting. Like I said, I haven't had the opportunity to test that, so I don't know how well that actually works or what the workflow is for that, but he spoke highly of it.
I'm thinking I'm going to have to come down to Texas, and we're going to have to, maybe crash some cars.
Come on.
You also
love it.
Take into account the atmospheric conditions, especially in South Texas on a hot day. But I know we do have other verticals, Grant, that utilize in the energy sector thermal mapping, such as solar inspection. And then 2 follow-up questions, Grant, on Terra. One was in regards to will it work on Mac? And another was, can you utilize non-enterprise imagery? And I believe also not just non-enterprise, but other imagery in Terra.
Yes, so you cannot run it on a Mac. It only runs on Windows. And then you can utilize photos from other drones as well, not just the Mavic 3 Enterprise or the M300 to do your 2D maps or 3D models. Just would want to consider maybe if you had like a Mavic Mini, you won't be able to like automate the flight, and then obviously the camera differences among others. So, yep. And then, sorry, just quick note, it seems the survey is down, maybe too many people taking it right now. So we'll make sure to send up a follow-up email if you'd like to take that and get a 3-month trial to the Terra side. So yes. But I think we are running up on time here. Chief, any final questions before we wrap things up here?
There are so many. I think one of the other last questions that might be beneficial for all is what are you guys using for GCPs? I'm not sure if that was covered already.
As far as what we're using for what we're laying down for GCPs there, Chief,
I
or
believe that
how,
was the question.
or how are we marking them with a rover-based system?
I think the question was using for laying down, but also I did see another one that also questioned, are you using known points or RTK? So just kind of real quick how you're getting your measurements, I think.
So, so what I do is so to get the GCP points, what I do is I'll set up a base station, a third-party base station, and that will hook into an Intrep that. And then I'll use a Pix4D Vidoc system to get the GPS coordinate systems off of the GP or off the ground control points. The ground control points I just buy off of Amazon. They're the white and black 2 foot by 2 foot checkers with 0 to 10. I got some orange and black ones. I got some white and black ones. But that's what I do. So now what I'm going to say is, if you're going to do that, make sure to study up on how to set your coordinate systems, because that's the biggest thing that you're going to have to really study, is how to set up your coordinate systems to get those GPS coordinate systems to talk with Terra, or if you're using Pix4D or Drone Deploy or whatever, you got to make sure to set up your coordinate systems right. So, Brandon?
So it depends on the scene on which targets I put out, but we have the forensic mapping solutions. We have the forensic mapping solutions targets that they sell. It comes with 10 hard, non-reflective metal targets, which is great because wind won't blow them over, or if somebody runs over the ground control point, it's not going to damage it. But those are high contrast as well. In the event that we cannot put ground control points targets out there for whatever reason, we'll paint targets on the ground. Just whenever you're doing that, make sure that you itemize out your numbers properly so that you know which targets are which ones, so that you don't shoot a ground control point 4 on ground control point 1. And then the other thing that you want to make sure that you take into account is how big of an area that you're using the stake in your RTK system, how big that error is. So we'll typically paint a dot, draw a circle, and then run the number next to it. We want to make sure that that dot isn't any bigger than, say, $0.50, because that is going to be your margin of error no matter what you do, because you don't have a finite point like you do in the targets. So that's a margin of error that we're willing to accept on a scene in those instances.
Awesome. And what is the specific base station you use on your end, Brandon? There's just a question on that.
So we had the forensic mapping solutions RTK bundle. It was a bundle that they put together, and lately we have been transitioning to a Trimble R2 unit.
Got it. Alrighty. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much to both Brandon and Aaron for sharing some of their valuable time to prepare for this webinar and to join us today. Really a wealth of information that they teach across the nation, and really honored to have them on the webinar today. So thank you both, and thank you for Chief Baker in the background as well. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of the questions today, but you're welcome to follow up with me via email, and you'll also be getting a recording of the webinar here today as well, and we'll plan to post that up on YouTube as well. So thank you very much, and hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.